And I'm simply declaring in the new year that I am not cattle. I am not owned by the globalist. I am not their property. I am not an animal. They do not have a right to feed on me. Notice the globalists have all these rules for us and then exempt themselves from all the rules that they place on us. They tell us we don't have free will or we don't control our own destiny. But then meanwhile, they're obsessed with their free will and controlling their destiny, and they don't want us involved in any decisions that are made on this planet because they're building the planet in their nightmare image. And in that image, in that system, in that world that we're entering into, we're not part of it. We are to be removed, destroyed. And if you ignore the legions of admissions and blueprints and white papers by the controllers where they admit all this, you do so at your own peril. So we'll tell you more about the special guest joining us coming up in the next segment. I walked into the office yesterday, and Matt Ryan was saying, look at these stories on Drudge about birds falling out of the sky. And he started mentioning how this had happened in Austin last year. Thousands and thousands of sparrows and other birds died. And I made the point, well, they died over time in a few-week period. But when you see something like what happened in Arkansas, it's very suspicious. And in the past, it's been proven that it's been associated with chemical, biological, radiological tests that have been done. But there's not just chemical, biological, or classic radiological test. There's also wave test, which I guess are a form of radiation, different scalar technologies, HARP systems. Really, their root goes back to one of the greatest minds in history, of course, Mr. Tesla. There's also been a big fish die-off nearby, and this happened on New Year's Day, and it's sort of getting attention yesterday on Sunday into today. Is mass bird and fish die-off connected to government testing? That is the question. And Paul Watson and I threw together this article quickly this morning. I've got Watson adding some more links to more modern admissions of secret chemical, biological, and radiological testing that's been declassified or leaked because it's important to really show people a wide spectrum of examples. But blackbirds, ducks, other birds fell out of the sky in a 1-mile area. There was no hail. There was no lightning because witnesses were up because it was the new year. And I know in Arkansas and Oklahoma particularly, and I was trying to dig it up this morning. For some reason, I couldn't find it because it's about 9 years old. And you have to remember the exact headline or you can't find it. But remember 9 years ago, it was in the Daily Oklahoman and a bunch of other papers, quote, biological threat testing was part of the headline. And they had Cessnas and other aircraft, quote, spraying biological weapons simulants all over the state. And then it turned out it wasn't a simulant. It was Subtilis globigi and one other bacteria directly in the literature linked to abortions in all mammal species, from rats up to horses, dogs, humans, you name it. And, well, we're going to read over Watson's article when we come back. Then we're going to get into what's happening in the new year, all of the draconian legislation they're trying to now enforce. Boehner's promise to try to repeal government takeover of health care in their first 2 weeks in the new legislative session. It's all coming up. Stay with us. You know, I spend a lot of time covering and discussing secret chemical, biological, radiological tests that are done on the American people. Because there are tens of thousands of declassified individual instances, thousands of declassified programs, and we know that that is only a small thumbnail sketch of what's really going on. The globalists see themselves, that's why it's important to know history, the globalists, the social engineers, see themselves as societal engineers, but more importantly, as scientists. And they see this as a scientific control grid that they've set up, so they need data. They need to test. And while they're gathering data, they're also training cadres of scientists and technicians that will put a small child in a chamber and radiate them to death, that will march U.S. Army soldiers into a chamber and nerve gas them, all declassified, that will spray bioweapons in the New York subway, that will spray bioweapons in the San Francisco ship channel, that will spray bioweapons on White Rock, New Mexico, that will spray bioweapons on Oklahoma City. Thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of programs, tens of thousands of individual instances. And when you bring this to someone who's under mind control, that is the general public, because there's not just chemical, biological, radiological testing, there's also societal, psychological confusion, warfare through the television, the reduction of the language, the chemicals and biologicals that are added, things like fluoride that's an adjuvant, an accelerant, and all the other trace chemicals they're adding. This is a giant mind control grid. And it's all about compartmentalization, need to know. And it's all about keeping the public in the dark on the giant eugenics program while they test the soft kills, while they train the public to prepare for megadeath, while they train the public to prepare for mass culling and a future without humanity. Notice how they're romanticizing that everywhere. They're getting you ready, your subconscious mind, to accept it so you don't resist during the first accelerated phases of the next level of this. Now, the big trump card we've got is we're aware of the program, we're aware of the enemy's operations. They think that because it's so horrific, despite the fact it's publicly available information, that the average person will be so subconsciously horrified that they will engage in crime stop or doublethink and convince themselves it's not real. And I believe in you. Plus, I know it's not going to even take a majority of people to beat these globalists. It's going to take folks that are willing to understand it and face what we're dealing with. Now, that said today, is mass bird and fish die-off connected to government testing? And we see these reports all the time. The first thing you need to understand is they've done studies with these no-stick stovetops. And when you first heat them up, they off-gas, and it will kill most species of bird. Because very small trace amounts of toxic gases will kill a bird because of their whole metabolic system and their constitution, that will not kill a polar bear or a rat or a monkey or a Homo sapiens sapien. That's why they have canaries in coal mines. And this entire weekend, it was chemtrail central. The entire sky was sprayed from end to end. They then expanded. It blocked a wet weather front from coming in to central Texas and stopped us from getting the rain we needed. The planes always show up ahead of a front. And remember, we have literally, it's got to be more than 50 patents. And I've got to stop the obsession with research and go ahead and put out the eugenics film. I mean, chemtrails are 100% confirmed. How they do it, how they load it, how it all works. It's compartmentalized. Over a decade ago, knowing their program of compartmentalization, need to know, I knew it had to be mixed with a jet fuel. That way the airlines don't even really know, except at the executive level. The pilots don't know. It's not special aircraft doing this, though the military now admits they do have some special aircraft. The Department of Energy has some as well. There's been a giant, at least 18-year secret weather modification program going on to alter Earth's atmosphere. Because we've been exposing it, now John P. Holder, the White House science czar, has begun to come out with some of this because it was hurting them too bad to just flatly deny it all. So, I mean, while the average person's sitting around talking about how sports only matter or how their 401k matters and nothing else, we're living on a planet where a eugenics, mass-murdering elite openly are modifying the atmosphere. They've got hundreds of secret torture sites all over the world, mind control facilities at Camp X-Ray on record, where they're manufacturing Muslim terrorists. That's why they grab up 14-year-old kids off the battlefield and take them there for 5 years, then release them to be al-Qaeda commanders, and then they're untouchable. It's the same thing with Anwar al-Awlaki, but again, it's hidden in plain view that he hangs out secretly at the Pentagon getting orders, even comes out in Fox News. Nobody gets in trouble. The average Fox News viewer just doesn't even register it when they hear it. just like the massive weather modification program. But that's only a subset. We know about declassified chemical, radiological, biological testing, including lethal testing going on at an accelerated rate from the 1920s through to today. People who say they couldn't get away with this, they haven't. Most of it's public. People who say they couldn't get away with the 9/11, it wasn't declassified until the 1980s. In 1987, when the program started, upwards of 500,000 women on record sterilized in the United States secretly. Babies murdered at birth because they had poor mothers. That's now been declassified. But before it was ever declassified, they had newsreels promoting the murder of babies at birth, and we have clips of that in English from the United States in 1930 in my film, Endgame Blueprint for Global Enslavement. The simulated murder of a newborn baby and how good it is. That they were showing people that. That's why Hitler was loved in America. Because he praised America. He praised Margaret Sanger. He praised all the eugenicists. He praised the Rockefellers. He was the savior. But we're supposed to forget that. My grandfather told me about growing up in Dallas, and all the time on the radio, mainline, they played Hitler speeches and translated it and said how great Hitler was. Right up in Dallas, on Dallas radio stations. You're supposed to forget all that. Hitler is a creation of the New World Order, not the other way around. He's only one arm, one little arm of this system. So to get into the birds dying, clearly when you have, some reports are 5, 4, 2,000 birds, including ducks, falling out of the sky in first a 1 mile, then a 2 mile area, something's going on. Fish die-offs nearby as well. These have always been associated with chemical and biological testing. It may only hurt a big old 150-pound, 200-pound human, but a bird gets a whiff of it, they're going to die. It made national news back in 1997 when hundreds of witnesses, including police and others that we interviewed on air in Belton, Texas, north of where I sit, saw helicopters with spray canisters flying over the small town and neighborhoods, and people got violently ill, and it ended up being a national news story. They do this stuff right out in the open to test the troops, to test the pilots, to test the media, to see what they can get away with. And now they've set the precedent to just do this stuff right out in the open. And when it comes out that, oh, yeah, up into the 1990s, they were nerve gassing our troops to death. Oh, yeah, and, you know, in 2003, they were taking foster kids and testing chemicals on them and even killing some of them in New York State. So what? And it sets the precedent. And I have sat here with mainstream news in my office, bringing up chemical, biological, radiological secret testing. And the talk show host, the news presenters, the Nightline people, MSNBC, they look at you like you're crazy. So I hand them mainstream news articles about it, and they still laugh at you. See, they can't face it. They say I'm crazy, even though I have all the admissions. Because if they ever admitted up to this, they'd have to do something about it. But because they subconsciously feel powerless against the government, they go ahead and deny it. Or they make excuses for it. Oh, those are isolated incidents. Oh, those were just rogue scientists. Really? Why don't they ever go to prison? Why do they get promotions for it? I'm going to come back, go over Paul Watson and the story I did with him. Stay with us. I know I spend a lot of time on chemical, biological, radiological secret testing, but when you know that the government from the highest levels has been giving the orders, at least since the 20s, to secretly murder people in the name of science, it tells you everything you need to know about these people. And then nothing that they say or do matters anymore because you understand that presidents come and go, but this scientific dictatorship continues. And then you find out by discovering history, you are empowered. You find out it's the Rockefeller family more than anybody, but also the British royalty and others who on record funded the modern sciences from a eugenics perspective of how to dominate and control populations and how to give life extension technologies to their own families. It was Rockefeller grants in a quest for 30 years that discovered DNA and the double helix. Watson, the main discoverer of it, is on record saying blacks aren't human and being a big Nazi. And the media always knew this. They could read his books. That's why I put out ENDGAME 3.5 years ago, calling out Watson. And then about a year after the film came out, he made statements about blacks being basically stupid and not being fully Homo sapien sapien. And he had to resign from Cold Springs Harbor Human Genome Project. What's Cold Springs Harbor? That's the Rockefeller Institute on Eugenics. And the German office was the Kaiser Wilhelm branch. And so I see a news story about a bunch of birds mysteriously dying, falling out of the sky. And I know about the past reports of this. Remember the other reports about green goo falling out of the sky and all the rest of it and birds dying all over the country? And we know there's all this bizarre weather modification going on. They're also testing all these different microwaves and things. Is mass bird and fish die-off connected to government testing? 1977 Senate hearing found that U.S. government had infected hundreds of cities with biological agents. But they tell you that the TSA needs to put their hands down your pants and now scan your credit cards and copy them and confiscate your Christmas calendar because it's to keep you safe from Al-Qaeda. But the government's been spraying the public for a long time. Oh, but again, that's to protect us too. A mass die-off of birds and fish in Arkansas, which prompted a response by U.S. Environmental Services, has residents asking questions about the cause. Could secret government testing be responsible for the carnage? You know what I find interesting, and we need to get callers from BB and other areas where similar things happened, not just in that town. We're getting reports from other towns. Were there already a big influx of people in the town the night before? Did you see government trucks with their hazmat suits in the front seat? Oklahoma City, 9/11, First World Trade Center attack, 93. They always have a drill right before. What did the deputy head of FEMA, Mr. Kennedy, tell ABC News on 9/11? Oh, it's a good thing we got here on September 10th and we're already ready and had moved things out to the front of the pier in the command center. And then the media was like, what are you talking about? So a day later they said, oh, that was a mistake. FEMA wasn't there a day before. Forget what he said. Remember that? Remember that? And then it got declassified a few years later. Oh, you bet. It's true. It all happened. FEMA was running a drill called Tripod 2, a drill where they had moved out the day before into command centers, simulating an attack on the World Trade Centers. The way you'll know this is a staged event, for sure, is if the hazmat teams or advanced teams were already there on New Year's Eve. Because if you look at the declassified 1966 bioweapon spraying in the New York subway, just the parts that are declassified, they didn't declassify at all, they had hundreds of Army doctors posing in nearby hospitals as regular doctors at emergency rooms to get samples when the people they'd hit with the bioweapon came in. So they'll have their people in place for one of these tests to see what it does to the humans. And again, there's other groups testing. Will the media figure out what's happening? What will the locals do? It's all gauging what they can introduce into the environment, what they can spray us with. I mean, remember last year? We were getting the reports, and then it was confirmed that they were shooting up little kids in elementary school with the flu shot without their parents' authorization, kind of like Pennsylvania, watching you over the laptops at home. All right. right, getting back to this article, and then I'm going to shift gears into other news. I think we should make this the #1 search term today, dealing with the mass bird die-off, because where there's smoke, there's fire. There's no way this was hail, which no one reported hail. Lightning, no. You have small birds, large birds being killed, and so many times it is associated with chemical, biological, radiological testing. And almost all the time, they don't tell you. For years out in California, they'd be trying to eradicate different types of beetles and moths. And because these chemicals are known as toxic to humans, the state just kept it secret until people did FOIA request and were actually able to dig all of this information up. And then the population did discover that, indeed, that had been going on. So the attitude is out of sight, out of mind. Just don't tell the public about what's happening. I mean, there's no telling what this could have been. Could have been some type of magnetic system being tested. But I'm going to continue along this line, then we're going to get into other news here. Is mass bird and fish die-off connected to government testing? 1977 Senate hearing found that U.S. government had infected hundreds of cities with biological agents. A mass die-off of birds and fish in Arkansas, which prompted a response by U.S. Environmental Services, has residents asking questions about the case. Could secret government testing be responsible for the carnage? Well, I mean, let's go back just in the last year with Obama on television and the EPA saying core exit is not bad for you and that no one was ill, cleaning it up in the Gulf, cleaning up the oil. Just like the government told the firefighters, police, and emergency workers, hey, there's no problem with this asbestos dust. You don't have to wear a respirator. When they knew full well, and it later came out, day one in their own reports, that it was deadly poison. But you've got to ask the population, the police, the firemen, the medical workers, what's wrong with you? Why, if the government's been caught thousands and thousands of times murdering us premeditatedly, why do we believe them? Why do we trust them still? I mean, I guess we really are prey animals. I guess we really are idiots. I guess we really do deserve it. Like Ron Paul said a month or so ago on the show. If people put up with the government sticking their hands down our pants, if the people put up with this type of abuse, if the people go along with this, then I guess we do deserve it in a way. And that's how the globalists see it. If we'll put up with this, then we're fair game. Well, I'm here declaring I'm a human being. I'm conscious. I don't want to be poisoned. I don't want stuff in my water. I don't want you doing this to me, and I'm going to come after you politically and try to bring you to justice. I'm giving fight back to you. I'm not just acquiescing like I'm a T-bone steak on the table, authorizing you to eat me. Okay, I'm not your property. Continuing here. Is mass bird and fish die-off connected to government testing? Again, some news says 4,000, others 2,000. I don't know what the real number is. Around 2,000 red-winged blackbirds as well as ducks fell to their deaths over a mile area of Beebe, Arkansas. On Friday night, U.S. Environmental Services workers wore hazmat suits and gas masks as they picked up the dead birds. An area used by the birds to roost was unaffected, leading officials to conclude that the birds could not have died from an illness or have been targeted for poisoning. Lightning, fireworks, and high-altitude hail have been forwarded as possible culprits. But no hail hit the ground. I've been in Iraq and back and not seen anything like this, BB resident Jeff Drennan told local Fox 16 News on Sunday. You know my kids are out here playing, and you don't know if it's safe, he added. They're walking around with chemical suits, picking them up with gas masks and everything. See, the government tells you everything's fine, but they're wearing hazmat suits. In a related story, 100,000 fish were found dead in northwest Arkansas. They were found along a 20-mile stretch of the Ozark Dam and Highway 109 bridge in Franklin County. Scalar weapons that can artificially manipulate the environment could be responsible for the mass die-offs. We know for a fact that over the last decade, the U.S. military-industrial complex was aware and involved in the testing of such technology. In 1997, telling the Army Times in the April issue, Defense Secretary William Cohen stated, other terrorists are engaging even in an eco-type of terrorism whereby they can alter the climate, set off earthquakes, volcanoes remotely through the use of electromagnetic waves. So there are plenty of ingenious minds out there that are at work on finding ways in which they can wreak havoc upon other nations. It's real, still quoting Cohen. And that's the reason why we have to intensify our efforts. Now, tectonic weapons, volcanic weapons, sound weapons, microwave weapons, Tesla weapons, HARP weapons. Remember 4 years ago, I was contacted by the director of HARP. Out of the blue, the director of HARP would like to come on your show. In fact, I want to contact them again up in Alaska and try to get them back on. Then the day of the interview comes. And John Harmon, who runs things up at Genesis, says, hey, there's some military guy on the phone before we can get this head scientist on, the civilian head of the base. And he goes, all right, I will be sitting in during the interview. If I don't like what I'm hearing, the interview may abruptly end, or I may cut the audio off. You don't have to talk to me. And I said, well, I wasn't told about this. I mean, you guys contacted us. Well, the director would like to come on your show. The director likes your show. And I said, okay, whatever. So we go on air, and only once, and luckily it was going to break, he cut the guy off. And once we went to break, he said, I don't like where this is going. What did the director of, it was a colonel, what did the director of HARP say that made the colonel in the Air Force cut him off? He said, oh, sometimes we ignite the atmosphere on fire at night with HARP. I mean, this is the type of technology they've got. And just like they've denied all the weather modification, now they're starting to admit a lot of that. I know that Ben Livingston, it was declassified, what, 7 years ago, that Ben Livingston was the father of weather weapons and that he'd flown into typhoons over 200-mile-an-hour winds after World War II, himself the first person to fly into them. Hurricanes, he'd flooded the North Vietnamese out. He could make a huge thunderstorm and a flood out of a clear sky in hours with just a few aircraft. And he certified for the Naval Weapons Laboratory and Stanford Research that they could create, control, destroy, weaken, whatever they want, hurricanes. And he came on my show because it had just been declassified so he could talk about it all. I saw him in a Midland newspaper talking about, why don't we just knock out these hurricanes? We had it certified in '67 that we could do it. Why, with just 8 aircraft, I could have knocked out that Katrina. It was right after Katrina. And they just declassified a bunch of it so he could talk. I called him up, got him on the show, flew him to Austin. But, boy, after those interviews aired, he got some phone calls and said, sorry, I've gotten calls from people. I'm not coming back on your show. National security. He'd say no to my producer politely, and I'd call him up at home. Come on, Mr. Livingston, please come back on. No, I'm not going to do it. Not going to do it. And it was right after that time that Kay Bailey Hutchinson came out and said, oh, we're going to have a weather modification board, a Senate committee to do all of this. So, I mean, the point is there's a lot of stuff going on the public isn't being told, and we know that the government has done everything you can imagine to the American people over and over and over and over again. And so why do we trust them? The whole government should be abolished. The whole thing should be removed. Everything should be declassified. Get all that pus out of there. Heal the wound. But instead, under national security, it festers and festers. Under Homeland Security, the system is now just gobbling up our entire economy. And Watson's article just goes on through many examples of this. And he's also added the full-length version from YouTube, from a director's channel, of Endgame, Blueprint for Global Enslavement. In fact, I'll show you on air right now the article. If you go to prisonplanet.com, you can go to the site, and the top story is on prisonplanet.com, is mass bird and fish die-off connected to government testing. And now they brought me another report. I went over a similar one earlier. Dead fish cover 20 miles of Arkansas River. And, of course, this is up there where the birds are dying as well. State officials on Monday were investigating why 80,000 to 100,000 fish washed up dead on shores of the Arkansas River last week. But that could be unrelated because of a oxygen problem or toxicity or some kind of virus. But it is suspicious because the bird situation is just very bizarre. But if you scroll down on the PrisonPlanet.com article, is mass bird and fish die-off connected to government testing? You will see at the bottom of the video, Endgame, Blueprint for Global Enslavement. And that film cost me over $100,000 to make. It covers only about, I don't know, 25 or 30 declassified nerve gassing of U.S. troops, radiating of U.S. children, Israel radiating 110,000 of their children, murdering many of them, the Nazi experiments. But it covers from the globalist own admissions why and how they're doing it. It's almost a 3-hour film. And I'm begging you to go get the free film at the bottom of this article and to get it out to everybody you know. You may know all about this stuff, but your friends, your family, your neighbors don't. And we can use a viral story that a lot of people are discussing right now. In fact, it's been the hottest search term the last 2 days running is the dead birds. We can use a variant of that to get millions of people. That's just one punch we're throwing. Doesn't mean it's going to defeat the globalist, but resistance is victory. If you're listening to this radio show, look in the mirror. You're the solution. You are the resistance. And I'd said that for a long time, and so had many other leaders in fights against tyranny before they kind of ruined it for us with T3 or T4. You know, this is John Connor, and if you're listening to my voice, you are the resistance. No. I kind of stole our thunder there, but if you are listening out there, you are the resistance, and resistance is victory. Is mass bird and fish die-off connected to government testing? Well, I haven't done a search term in about 3 weeks, and people have been asking me to do them, and I can't think of a better one than dealing with eugenics. What should we say to link it back to this article? Is mass bird and fish die-off connected to government testing? You guys got any ideas in there? I mean, what's a search term we can use? Because I gave Watson the headline. Watson wrote most of the article. I contributed to it. Yeah, but if I say that, that's conclusive, and that's not in our headline. That is a good headline. It just can't be too long. Is mass bird and fish die-off connected to government testing? Let me think here. A lot of times if I think and just throw one out, that becomes the search term. I got to be careful. An army of great activists are out there just waiting by their keyboards. Is mass bird and fish die-off connected to government testing? I don't know. Maybe bird government testing? That's 3 words. How's that sound? Bird government testing. Let's make bird government testing 3 words. That's the search term. Bird government testing. And while we're at it, if you type ENDGAME, and I guess until they try to delist it, into a search engine, not ENDGAME, Blueprint for Global Enslavement, just ENDGAME. It's not Samuel Beckett, the play. It's not the final chess moves, an ENDGAME. It's not even the U.S. government's Operation ENDGAME that got declassified after our film came out. That's a mass martial law plan. And that came out 2 years ago. You just type in ENDGAME. 2 words, ENDGAME, and the #1 search term on the web is already my film. the free video. So let's just make it Endgame. That way, number one, they'll see bird government testing. Because if I did something like bird die-off, that would just lead people to other stories that don't explain it. So we'll do bird government testing, and end game. And that way you'll have number one and number two, and then hopefully other blogs and news outfits, well, not hopefully, they always do, will then write about our story, and then that will get around the electronic Berlin Wall or blockade when this becomes the number one search terms in the next few hours. They've already delisted us from Google News so that people won't see it on the news feature, but that won't matter. That won't stop the great activists out there. So let's search the term bird government testing. 3 words, put that in Google over and over again, and end game. And we could do the third search if you want, because they've got hot searches, but then also hot topics. We could have a number one hot topic. If it's so long, it'll be a hot topic. End game blueprint for global enslavement. If you want to do the whole thing, end game blueprint for global enslavement. And it's a well-produced, powerful, 2-hour, 45-minute film. And the top link, in fact, let's show folks. Let's go to the devilish CIA Google right now, live on screen. And if you just put in end game as 1 word or 2 words, we'll do it as 2 words, end game, the top link, and at least last time I checked a few months ago, the top link when you put in end game is, as you can see right there, Alex Jones end game. So the top 3 links, yep. And then there's a Hollywood movie called Endgame, this number 4, the number 5 is us again. So there you have it. When we're already number one there, just naturally, so we're just augmenting and creating a synergy there. Search the term end game as 1 word or as 2 words. Technically, end game is usually 2 words. Yeah, let me search that and make sure. Yes, 2 words. End game is your second search, and then bird government testing is the other search. And then if you want to have the number one hot topic, we can just have Endgame Blueprint for Global Enslavement. And then people will be led, when they're interested in looking into the birds, they'll be led to the number one suspect. I mean, if a group's done this tens of thousands of times we know of, including lethally killing citizens premeditatedly, capital murder, then why wouldn't they be the number one suspect? See, there's a mental block that's been engineered into people not to look at reality. Stefan Molyneux joined us about a month ago, but he was on the road and had a bad phone line. He's going to be joining us via video Skype if you're a PrisonPlanet.tv viewer, so it should be great audio to go over a host of issues with Stefan, who's a very popular essayist and author and well-known anarchist. A real anarchist, not a communist wearing a red star, running around burning things on the police payroll. That's the system trying to put their false image of an anarchist in there to distract and to divert you so they can bring in their draconian control. So we're going to be talking to Stefan coming up at the 8 after. I've got a lot of economic news I want to get to. Natural disaster news, killed 295,000, that's being reported. Where's the TSA to protect us from natural disasters? I mean, they can't allow 1 death. Oh, they've got to take all our rights in case terrorists get us, but we have a much better chance of the government terrorist nerve gassing us or tasering us to death or putting chemicals in our water. But that's okay, see, because they're still our protectors. But I wanted to shift gears to this economic collapse blog article. This video is actually over a year old from the Financial Times of London. But notice a year later, so much of what he's talked about came true. I'm not going to play the whole thing. It's 10 minutes long. But it's in the article up on Infowars.com and PrisonPlanet.com titled, George Soros, the United States must stop resisting the orderly decline of the dollar, when that's all we have left. Globalism promised us milk and honey. Now we're deindustrialized. All we have is the dollar and the coming global currency and the new world order. Now, simultaneously, his Huffington Post, which he openly finances, Media Matters, openly finances them, They say that I'm a raving lunatic and none of this world government exists. Just remember that. We've got some huge weather modification news coming up here in just a moment. But you noticed, if you just joined us, we were playing a clip of George Soros a year ago in an interview with the Financial Times of London, a video interview, saying that we must give up the dollar as the world reserve currency, which will devastate the average American because we have no industry to speak of compared to what we have. We're so dependent on the dollar as the world reserve currency. Here's an example. We pay $3 a gallon. Europeans are paying $7 on average because they don't have the world reserve currency. Okay, got that figured out? And he went on to say China must own the New World Order. They must own it. Well, here's an article out of the Sydney Morning Herald today. China backs Spain to emerge from crisis. China is financing the recovery of Spain. Your tax money is as well to the private banks that are over there. It's not really a recovery. They always bill the latest blood-sucking as a bailout. But China is buying up Spain. Economic colonization. The biggest owner of U.S. debt now for 2 years is China. Secondarily, it's their partners, the private banking families. The Federal Reserve's number 2. So the communist Chinese with forced abortion, forced infanticide, medical experiments on babies they forcibly abort and keep alive, all admitted, those are the new good guys. Kill 1 million Iraqis, so what? China's great, let's do business with them. Well, then why not have a police state here? See, once you're not abhorred, once you're not upset, once you're not shocked by dehumanization, because you're modern and cool and sensible, well, nobody's going to be shocked by you having your lunch ate. Your neighbors aren't going to care as you're dragged off into the night. Why not? Jack Bauer does that on TV. It's cool. As long as they lick boots, everything's okay. So China backs Spain to emerge from crisis. China is confident Spain will recover from its economic crisis, and Beijing will buy Spanish public debt despite market fears of an Irish-style bailout, a top Chinese official said Monday. Why are they doing that? Well, what did Soros say? This is so important. What did Soros say a year ago in that Financial Times of London video interview? He said that the beginning of the end of the dollar would be marked by China moving away from the dollar in international commerce. It's a long 10-minute clip. You can go watch the full clip. Now, China 3 years ago started creeping away, buying a basket of other currencies and not buying as much U.S. currency. Now, going back 3 weeks ago, they have begun doing all trade with Russia in their own currency, in the Chinese currency. So that's it. That's the big signifier. That's when gold and silver started shooting up. That's the game plan. So the beginning of the end of the dollar has begun. The globalists may have some curveball in the middle of all this, but their stated policy is global coordinated devaluation, not just of the dollar, but every major currency in concert together until they bankrupt them all and bring in the Bancor SDR global digital currency, and we'll pay our carbon taxes and VAT taxes to these monsters. Now, here's Bloomberg. U.S. yield spreads fall below rest of the world. The last 3 months, the Chinese and the Russians have gotten rid of the U.S. AAA rating for U.S. bonds. But it takes a while for a big elephant to die. Or at least it's already dead, but for its body to cool off. But for the first time on record, investors are demanding a smaller premium to own U.S. corporate bonds than global company debt. Bondholders demanded 166 basis points in bids, yields, to hold U.S. investment-grade company debt instead of Treasury. So it's continuing. We've been set up to be butchered. And we probably will be, because the average adult's still sucking their thumb, only talking about sports. But before I go any further, we've been covering the mass bird and fish die-off and asked the question, is it connected to secret government testing? That'll be my first question for Stefan Molyneux here in just a moment. before we get into other issues with him. But Tim Frugier, the back office shipping department manager, ran back in here, and he said, have you seen the Mail Online, the Daily Mail newspaper? And I said, no. I'm going to show it to you right now. Have scientists discovered how to create downpours in the desert? And then the next graphic says ionizers produce charged particles into the desert air. Negatively charged ions rise with the hot air and attract dust. Moisture condenses around the charged dust. Eventually, this turns to cloud, which produces rain. Now, that's terraforming. Terraforming is a planet that's unlivable, technically, geoengineering. Now, there was a Nobel Prize winner, in 92, with the patents for chemicals to be added to jet fuel to create a cloud system over the Earth that would actually heat the Earth. I read to you Secretary of Defense Cohen in Army Times talking about tectonic weapons they've developed. It came out, last year? In fact, search the term. Israelis testing underground nukes to create earthquakes. That was in the Israeli newspapers. I mean, there's all sorts of craziness going on. But then we talk about it, and we're nuts. You talk to the average yuppie, and they just say this doesn't exist. I mean, if you told them a Model T car exists, if the government didn't give them the okay to talk about it existing, they'd say you were nuts. Scientists, again, have created 50 rainstorms in Abu Dhabi's Al Ain region just last year alone. And that's what they're admitting they're doing. So governments, I mean, they have a treaty back in '77 from the UN about this, banning it. Why would they need a treaty if it didn't exist? I've had the father of weather weapons, Ben Livingston, on the show, meteorologist. It's all there. And in our eugenics film, only one chapter. And it'll have more chemtrail info than anyone's ever put out. It's got all the patents, how they do it, how they operate. It's all compartmentalized. The average airline doesn't even know. It's added to the jet fuel manufacturers. And that's why 20 years ago, jets didn't leave trails that lasted more than a minute or two. Now they last for hours and hours and create that haze. I watched it yesterday. This is mass terraforming, creating bizarre weather. Then they offer their solution. Total government control. They want to be God. That's what eugenics is all about. But here it is. Have scientists discovered how to create downpours in the desert? And then they just go on and admit the whole thing. And when you look at these towers, this is what the Atlantic Richfield 1960s HARP patents state, is that it was weather control by ionizing the atmosphere. And if you go out to Alaska and other HARP facilities, they've got one near Austin, and you look at these, they always claim they're Doppler radar or they're just testing the atmosphere. No, these are weather control systems. This is exactly what has been built all over the world with your money. And, of course, we have a nice photo of the Queen of England hanging out with the Sheikh in the United Arab Emirates. They're enjoying their weather control there, just completely disgusting. All part of playing God and controlling our atmosphere. Very interesting information. So this is all going on. So if we have a government that admittedly thousands of times has run tests, in some cases thousands of times per test, so we're in the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands overall, nerve gassing troops, radiating foster children to death, and every major government does it. What is that all really about? Setting the precedent that the control freaks are God, that we're animals, creating cadres that will follow orders to kill upon order? What is it really all about? And joining us a little bit in the next hour, as we're getting him on a bit late via video link, is Stefan Molyneux, a Canadian philosopher, blogger, essayist, author, and host of Free Domain Radio series of podcasts. Very articulate gentleman. Some great videos have been made with his work. He's written numerous articles, been published on libertarian websites such as LouRockwell.com, Anti-War, and we really appreciate him joining us. He's a multi-time author. He has written on truth, the tyranny of illusions, universally preferable behavior. It just goes on. We'll talk about it all with him. His website is freedomainradio.com. And we've got him linked up on Infowars.com. But, Stefan, what is the nature of the control freak, and why do they always, like a tropism, like a spider spins a certain type of web, a plant turns towards the sun, Why do governments always wear black uniforms and in the end start mass murdering and burning everything while running around naked declaring themselves God? We now see TSA weekly literally going crazy, declaring God, stripping down naked. What is that tropism and how do we deal with it? And why is there sacrament murdering children?
Well, power is an addiction, and power can't be understood outside the context of psychological addictions. And psychological addictions always escalate. Like if you've ever known someone with a drug problem or a drinking problem, they always escalate until there's a catastrophe. And then, and sometimes only then, there is the possibility that people will wake up and say, you know, wait, if you're a heavy drinker and you find yourself lying in a ditch in Vegas with, I don't know, a dead hooker or something like that, then part of you is going to say, maybe, just maybe, I should look into my drinking as a problem. We're very close to that cliff edge, in my opinion, right now. As you say, the fiat currency is going down. WikiLeaks is about to expose the fact that Bank of America is probably extremely corrupt and has no particular ownership of the homes that they're foreclosing on, which is going to cause a massive run on U.S. debt. And so we're right close to sort of waking up in the ditch in Vegas and saying to ourselves, what are we doing by putting these nut jobs with guns at the center of organizing society? And how could we expect the initiation of force in the solution of social problems to come up with anything other than all of these series of catastrophes and disasters for the common man?
Very well said. I want one of your many research points is that nations are just, and I agree with you, are basically nothing more than farms, different systems of farming, and how the more open farms always create incredible inventions and wealth, but then that allows the parasites to grow, and it's a cycle. Break that down briefly, and then let's get into the WikiLeaks information. I was told by John Young, big WikiLeaks insider, who I want to get back on this week, Jaron, forgot to tell you that it would be Bank of America and other big banks. Now the mainstream media is saying that's indeed what's about to happen. Give us your view on what that's going to trigger. But first, you know, that amazing breakdown you do, and it's complex but at the same time simple, explaining how society really operates.
Sure. If you think about floating above a map of the world, then you see, of course, countries with borders and different colors. And my perspective is that, and it's a very strong case to be made for this, that what you're looking at is a series of tax farms where human beings are encouraged to breed. And then when they breed, for the most part, their children are taken into the care of the state. In other words, to break the parent-child bond, most people are forced, because of high taxation, to go, two parents are forced to go to work in the marketplace, which means that state-run or state-licensed daycares take over the children, which is something that the church in its wildest dreams could never have imagined. And then these children are brought up with adherence to the state as parent, and then they're told that the state is there to help them and there to take care of them and there to organize things, and they're made afraid of freedom. In other words, if you can convince your livestock that out there beyond the field is nothing but predators and danger, then you don't actually even need to build a fence, because they'll all just stay in the invisible electronic fence of propaganda. And so people grow up, and one of the amazing things that has happened in the democratic or crony capitalist model, which is what the US and most of Western Europe is currently running under, and my home tax farm of Canada, is that they realized that if you don't force someone into an occupation, which was the feudal and the Roman model, if you allow someone to choose his own occupation, he's going to feel a lot more free, and he's going to be a lot more productive because he's going to have enthusiasm. You can't make slaves enthusiastic. You can't make serfs enthusiastic. But people who become lawyers and doctors and accountants and podcasters have an enthusiasm because they believe that they're in control of their own lives. But of course, unless you control the currency, unless the citizens control the currency, there's no freedom, either economic or political whatsoever. So because we are allowed to choose our own occupations, we're that much more productive. We create that much more wealth, which is a story since the Industrial Revolution. However, that wealth is then further taxed and further taxed to create a massive and bloated slug-like leech of a ruling class that hangs off the economic jugular of the citizenry until, like a cancer, it grows to the point where it overwhelms the host. And that's what, of course, is happening with the government. But
and that's the crossroads that we've now entered. Will we kick the giant, parasitic, vampiric slug dripping with pus off of us, or this slug has mind control beams through the television, its eyes blink, you know, teaching you to love it and see it as a beautiful blonde. But, I mean, can we break the conditioning and see that it's a, you know, vomit-reeking slug, and will we pull it off of us and then, you know, crawl away and, you know, get some substance and survive, or will we succumb to the slug and let it fully suck us dry with its scrofulous mouth?
First of all, I'd like to thank you, Alex, for really getting behind my metaphor and giving it a good push. I think that really propelled it to a new height. We absolutely can, because we have mind-freeing rays called internet data packets, which people can get information that previously was completely unavailable. So we can, but there's no certainty that we will. That depends upon the actions and commitment and intensity of individuals. And this is the kind of problem that does not appear to happen in a catastrophic way until it's almost too late. So getting people to wake up to the rumblings at the top of the mountain saying there's going to be an avalanche, there's going to be an avalanche, and people are like, no, it's just snowing a little, you know, it snows sometimes. That's the challenge that we have to do, to remind people that we're not crazy for saying, wake up, and act.
Absolutely. Stefan Molyneux is our guest. We're going to come right back with him and get his view on these big WikiLeaks announcements. The next salvos to come out, reportedly, on Bank of America. Stay with us, GCNlive.com. It's a test case. If they are allowed to arrest or imprison or even execute, as Bill O'Reilly and Huckabee and others have called for, then there's no free press in this world. And I've seen Sarah Palin say that he's un-American and that he should be extradited here. Well, he's not an American. So, I mean, it really shows that Sarah Palin, whatever you think of her, is not the sharpest knife in the drawer. It's when she talked about our ally, North Korea. I mean, she's not fit to be dog catcher just with her knowledge of the world. But that's a distraction overall. The point I was trying to get to here is that a lot of people I respect, like Wayne Madsen and others, and John Young of Cryptome, who registered with the WikiLeaks domain, have said it's full of intelligence agency operatives. And that I remember hearing a year ago that next it would be going after banks, specifically enemies of George Soros and others. And now we see that coming out. But overall, it's very positive to have an open, free society. And I just see WikiLeaks being used as an electronic Pearl Harbor, and I predicted that. And now they want to come in with total draconian control in the name of restricting the web because of WikiLeaks. So I think at certain levels, this is being manipulated. Stefan, please continue.
Well, I think that the WikiLeaks is interesting because the revelations about the war in Afghanistan did not meet with much outrage from media pundits. The revelations about the spying on UN members and other nasty things that were going on in American intelligence community was not met with much outrage. Now the outrage is really boiling over because this is going to cut to the financial jugular of the fiat currency system. Because what happened, of course, as you know, is that people took out mortgages with the banks packaged them up, and basically took a cup of liquid, blue liquid, and put it into the ocean. In other words, they spliced and diced all of these mortgages and sold them in bits and pieces all over the world. And now that the mortgages are failing, people are saying, okay, who owns my house? Like, if you want to take my house back, you have to prove to me that you own it. But this has all been turned into confetti. All these deeds of ownership have been turned into confetti and blown into the four winds. And there's nothing there that anybody owns in particular. And if Bank of America knew this and foreclosed anyway, then they're going to be liable to significant criminal proceedings. That's going to go out to other banks in the U.S. system and overseas, which is going to be a hammer blow to the tottering fiat currency system around the world. And I think that's what people are becoming so hysterical about. That's why people are calling for the assassination of this guy who did nothing. He actually released all of his information through mainstream media. But of course, they're not courageous enough to go after the mainstream media because they need the mainstream media to lull the sheep with shiny objects of nonsense and inconsequentiality. So I think it's really important to understand that there's a lot more at stake for the ruling class with the Bank of America potential scandal than there ever was with the revelations about dishonesty in war and diplomacy.
Well, there's something more here. and I want to get your take on this, Stefan, that this too big to fail has been their plan since the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. These private banking families have used similar systems in Europe, in the third world, over and over again, by connecting everybody's pension funds and investments to this toxic stew of derivatives that have been mixed in with all the real investments. They can now always hold people hostage to give us unlimited trillions, bail us out, give us more power, or we'll bring the whole system down. But if you look at the mathematical breakdown, it's a foregone conclusion that nothing can fix this. All we can do is go ahead and take the hit and then arrest these criminals.
Well, yeah, that's absolutely right. The system can't be recovered. I think it's important to understand as well that the war chest of money was at its very highest peak because, of course, all the Social Security money has been collected and largely spent. But this is right before the biggest payout of government to citizen in history, which is the retirement of the baby boomers. So the amount of money that the government owes is right at its peak, and right before all of this money needs to start being paid out in health care and in old age pensions to people, the system itself gets completely pillaged. And I don't
exactly,
think that's
right at the time that the baby boomers start to retire. Oh, they've been investing all these years. Guess what? It's been stolen. So baby boomers, you better submit to total big government and all these new taxes on the young people and join us in the too big to fail, or you'll never get your money. But we know from the third world experiences, Argentina, the list goes on and on, Brazil, Nigeria, Zimbabwe, Eastern Europe, Weimar Republic, Germany, that once the yuppies buy in to the immorality of robbing everybody below them, then they're going to have it all taken from them as well. Stay there. I want you to continue on that key point, amazing point that Stefan just made. Stay with us. Okay, Stefan, you got cut off by the break and my gibbering. I was getting into the fact of, because I always bring in another element, about how right as in Europe and the United States and England and Canada, right as people have been paying into these Social Security Ponzi schemes, right as we're supposed to get our pension funds that we've invested, in these private systems, it's all gone in derivatives, and then we get the internal Goldman Sachs emails. They knew all about it. We know it was premeditated, and so they're holding the yuppies hostage, saying, if you want your goodies, you better go along with total government and really raping younger people. Now, will they buy into that? Stefan, how do you see all this coming together?
Well, look, I mean, there is a very strong problem, a huge problem that governments around the world are facing at the moment, which is that they have no money to pay off the Social Security and Medicare, Medicaid bills that are due. And like anybody who's caught with their pants down, who's not a very good person, the first thing that governments are trying to do is to create a scapegoat as to why the money isn't there. And they're going to have a lot of explaining to do, as Ricky Ricardo used to say. They're going to have a lot of explaining to do to the population who have no other options. They've been taxed so heavily. Their savings have been pillaged. Their houses have been devalued. They have nothing, or a lot of people have almost nothing to retire on. I mean, the majority of Americans are literally living pennies to pennies, paycheck to paycheck. They have nothing to retire on. So governments have no money to pay them. And so what are they going to do? Well, they create a crisis, they pillage what's left, and then they can blame the banks, and they can blame capitalism, they can blame freedom, and then they can move in and say, well, we tried giving your retirement money to the stock market, but the stock market pillaged it all, so now we're going to have to take over even more. It really is up to people who've got the economic knowledge and intelligence and hopefully communications abilities to remind people that the problem is not the handshake. The problem is always the gun. The gun in the room is what is always causing the problem. The fact that a government has the monopoly on violence is what is causing all of these problems. The stock market is a completely bizarre and mutated entity relative to its original purpose.
It's totally rigged, and I want you to get into that, and the whole system of government being a gang with a flag and a propaganda corps. But going back, because I want you to quantify this, and I want to quantify my position. Yes, they are using what's happened with the banks as a way to demonize capitalism, but that's free market, free will, moral capitalism, not the crony, fascist, insider capitalism. The predatory capitalism isn't capitalism at all. It's big mega corporations using government to consolidate power. So it's the mega elite on record preparing to scapegoat the middle class, smaller banks, and the free market for what they've done.
Well, that's exactly right. If you think of a sort of a neighborhood where there's a big mafia, the mafia goes and takes all of this money by threatening shopkeepers and honest workers. The mafia goes and takes all of this money, and then the mafia spends all this money on different things, catering and parties and sedans or whatever. And so a lot of businesses become dependent upon the mafia's spending habits, and they then, in a sense, work to legitimize the mafia because that's who they've become dependent on for their income. And so what's going to happen is people really only see the businesses. They don't see the government at the root of it. And so the businesses become a convenient scapegoat, though I would not say that all businesses are entirely innocent of collusion with the state. But yeah, it's really important to remember that the money that is collected and printed and manufactured and borrowed by government flows out into the economy, and it creates a lot of, like sharks have those little striped fish that hang around and pick up the bits of fish that they chew. There's a lot of fascistic corporations hanging off the government's money.
Yes, government empowers those fascistic corporations. That's why they're always lobbying to expand it. And out of 100 largest economies, almost half of them are not countries. They're now private corporations. So that's my issue with pure anarchists sometimes, is they see a company as a company when they really operate as a government, and then they create artificial clones of real moves to liberty. They create privatization, but it isn't really privatization. It is a private group now becoming quasi-government.
Well, look, corporations are state entities. It's really important to remember corporations were created in the 19th century to give executives to exclude them from liability for what their company did. And in return for this exclusion of liability, the corporate executives agree to pay taxes, right? So it's a bribe to the government in the form of corporate taxes in return for the exclusion from liability for whatever their companies do. And that's really the fundamentals. There's no such thing as a corporation as we currently understand it now. There would be never any such thing without the government. It is a state-created predatory monster. But it's really, really important to remember that these things would have no power without the violence of the state driving all of this money and all of this power. We have to, in a sense, look past the corruptions of the corporations, which is a mere effect of state power, and look at the root of evil, which is the gun held to the neck of the average citizen to pay taxes, to be a taxed livestock, and to be obedient, to send their kids to school, to submit to authority. It's the gun, not the effects of the gun, that we need to focus on.
Well, I agree with you that if you go back 235 years ago when this country got founded, there were no corporations. And then about 160 years ago, in a few limited cases, government would want to build a bridge or a railroad, and robber barons, the Carnegies, the Rockefellers, the usual suspects, on record came and said, give us a corporation then for liability protection, and it would only be for the life of the construction project. Now here we are with corporations that have immunity, that have rights that never go away.
Well, yeah, and look, executives get to take the profits out of a corporation, but they don't have to pay losses back into the corporation. It's a one-way money tunnel. And that, of course, is a pretty sweet deal. It's the private equivalent of the Federal Reserve in that you can make money and you get to keep the winnings. But if you lose money, the employees and the taxpayers, the employees and the stockholders are the ones who get shafted. So again, it's really easy to look at corporations because they're more visible and they're what we actually deal with. And corporations, you can also have some small effect on them through boycotts, which you can't have through government. But to me, the problems with corporatism are a distraction from the real cause of it. I think if you think of a sort of stream coming down a river, if somebody's pouring bucket after bucket of pollutant or blood in the top of the stream, then there's going to be all these problems downstream. And we're always distracted by looking at the problems downstream and saying, well, how are we going to clean this? How are we going to fix this? How are we going to make this whole again? But what we have to do is go to the source where somebody's pouring all this pollutant, and that is the state. The corporate problems are an effect of the monopoly of power and currency and counterfeiting that the state holds. And it's really important not to be distracted by the effects of power and continue to drill down to the actual source of all of this, which is the monopoly of force that the government has.
Well, I tend to agree with you. But, I'd like to give you the floor in the last 20 minutes or so that we've got left, Stefan. I mean, I've got some other questions to get your perspective on this. How do you see this ending? Where do you see this going? Clearly in history, governments filled with the type of miscreants who can only be successful within that artificial system go on a power-mad drinking binge, as you described it, literally drinking blood, in one way or the other, sucking off their fellow humans. They always create a stagnation where the average person just stops producing as their ultimate form of protest towards government. I mean, where do you see this ending? I mean, clearly government is entering the depths of insanity right now.
Well, it's only insanity if you're looking for sustainable income for society as a whole. The people who are currently pillaging the treasury are getting millions and billions and sometimes even trillions of dollars, which they can then live on for 10 generations. So it's only insane for society as a whole. It's entirely sane and rational, evil, but rational in terms of self-interest for the people who are currently controlling the money system and the government. So the way it's going to go, in my opinion, Alex, is that I mean, it's either going to get better or it's going to get worse, for sure. And it's not going to get better for everyone, and it's not going to get worse for everyone. So it's a complex question. Again, I want to reiterate to your point about, people, buying subscriptions and so on. It is really important that we support people either directly or indirectly, or become one of those people who are out there talking the truth to power. I think it's really important. So it is up to the actions of individuals. That is exactly, there's no inevitability in history as there is no inevitability in anyone's personal life. It is entirely based upon the choices you make and the commitments that you have. That having been said, I think that what's going to happen is pretty predictable, which is that the dependent classes are going to get the short end of the stick, to say the least, right? So the people who are retiring, the people who are dependent on welfare, the people who are dependent upon the government largesse, just as at the end of the Roman Empire, they get truly shafted. And what happens is the government, Obama and people are going to get on the TV and they're going to say, well, this is a terrible situation. The bankers stole all the money. We as the government, we're just so helpless to do anything about it. And so what we have to do together is we have to get on a war footing with scarcity. So we have to, all buckle down. We all have to share the pain. We're going to have to share accommodations. We're going to have to eat cat food. We're going to have to, not have as much food for our pets. We're going to have to eye our goldfish with tartar sauce. We're going to have to do all of this pulling together. And this artificial war and togetherness is going to create it. It's going to be created because of all the scarcity that is coming down the pipe for the people who are dependent upon state power.
I totally agree with you, by the way, and we see how this is premeditated because they've been preparing the green austerity and the rationing and training the younger people that it's really sexy, and so they're getting everyone prepared that it's cool to have austerity. I mean, if you go to Whole Foods, literally every time I'm in there every few months, half the magazines are how cool austerity is and how cool it is to lose your house and how bad it is to have money. Yeah, so they will also then be sicked on anybody who's been able to not be completely destroyed by this system.
Yeah, the fat will always teach the hungry that starvation is a virtue. That's how they sort of maintain themselves. And some people will fall for this and say, well, we're now in a war against scarcity and we've all got to pull together. But some people will simply run out of patience and there will be the inevitable riots and there will be the inevitable blockades. I mean, up here in Canada, when they tried to reduce some of the farmers' payouts, these subsidies for farming, which are so destructive to the world economy as a whole, and particularly to third world farmers who can't compete with free food dumped on their lands. They tried to cut the subsidies to the farmers. The farmers all took their tractors and drove at 3 miles an hour up and down the highways, basically killing the entire economy. So there is going to be an escalation of resistance over time. There is going to be an escalation of violence. It's too late to prevent that, in my opinion. But what we can do is basically, once the gun comes out of the holster, it's going to be a lot more evident to people when we've been saying for years and years and decades, when we've been saying there's a gun in the room that you don't see. It's not a social contract. It's livestock. You are expendable. You are owned. You are harvested like a crop. It sounds nutty when people see Obama giving handshakes and being charismatic and presentable and wearing a suit and not fatigues. But when the guns come out, as they're going to come out when the dependent classes rise up against this scarcity, when the guns comes out, not only will people see the gun in the room that we've always been talking about, but the fact that we've always been talking about it and now it comes gives us a kind of credibility that can really help.
And by the way, they're already training us that when the gun comes out, it's for Al-Qaeda. But then when we get the internal documents, it's all about us. This whole grid is for all of us. We'll be right back. We're going into very serious times, but I'm kind of looking forward to it. This slow rotting, this marination in this false reality that only big government can create has made us weak. And we don't really learn about our mettle until we get tested. The Drudge Report is top linked in red to our story. I was just over visiting drudgereport.com and looking at these stories about hundreds of youth running around, rioting inside of a mall and gunshots outside. And now the news is, and the police are saying it may have been organized on the internet. Oh, so the government needs to censor the web now. Well, how about using social media for flash mobs for liberty and freedom, not for lawlessness? But I was over there looking at those stories that I was going to cover next hour after our guest leaves us. And, you know, dead fish cover 20 miles of Arkansas River. Thousands of birds fall from sky. Connected to government testing, ? And my only issue, as I said earlier, if government's always been doing this over and over again, why isn't government being looked at? Going back to that question from earlier, Stefan, because I really want your insightful view on this. Why does anyone trust or like government when government is the author of almost all major crimes, the only author of giant mass murder in the hundreds of thousands and millions, when every major government is constantly caught testing deadly chemical, biologicals, and radiologicals on populations? A, why does the public, through, I guess, some kind of, what's the psychological disorder where people love their abusers?
Stockholm Syndrome.
Yeah, Stockholm. I mean, is it Stockholm Syndrome, or Stockholm by proxy? Well, I mean, there's that question as I'm ranting here, but then also, why does government, again, spin this same type of web every time?
Well, I think it really is the essential question, because the fundamentals of what we're talking about in the freedom movement are so simple. It's so simple. It is like saying stealing is bad, violence is bad, except in self-defense. This is kindergarten morality, right? Don't hit, don't steal, don't punch, and keep your word. Everything we're talking about is so simple. It's not like we're trying to convince pygmies of Einstein's theory of relativity. We're talking about very, very simple things here. And the question I've always struggled with, Alice, is why is it so hard for people to understand these basic things? And I think there's a couple of answers I'll just touch on briefly here. I don't claim to have a monopoly on the answers, but the first is, of course, the Stockholm Syndrome, that the government raises most people. They spend more time with the government than they do with their parents, than they do with their community. And so what happens is they end up loving the government, so to speak. They end up attached to this authority figure that they imprinted upon. It's like you see those ducks in nature shows that imprint upon an orange balloon, and then they just follow that balloon around. It's just an imprinting.
Instead, they've imprinted on the blood-drinking slug.
Well, sure, except they see it as a guardian angel or whatever, right? So I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing is that people don't like to try to reduce power, because then they'll find out that they can't, right? So even Sam Harris, who seems a scientist and a rationalist, is talking for, increased government power in the economy and a world government and so on. And why are they doing that? Because people like to feel like they're having an effect on changing things. And every time you go to the government and say, I think you should have more power, the government says, I'm with you, man. I'm with you, brother, 150%. That's a great idea. And then things change. You want to pass another law. You want to raise a new tax. You want to punish someone else. That all works. So people like getting behind that tank rolling down the hill and pushing it because they feel like they're having some effect. You try and reduce the power of government, you'll realize just how little power you really have in your society.
Very well said. And the social engineers are masters at steering that foaming at the mouth mob that the Founding Fathers warned us about so much. We'll be right back in 60 seconds with our guest. Stay with us. Stefan Molyneux is our guest, author, researcher. We're going to talk to Stefan for 10 hours. Got a bunch of economic news, geopolitical news, environmental news, a lot of hardcore information coming up. And I've also got a list of points I want to go over before this next hour ends. But in the 4 minutes we've got left, Stefan, I want to thank you for joining us, A. B, other points that you see on the horizon for 2011. Do you think that the awakening, that we can really say 2010 was the year of the awakening, or do you think I'm wrong on that point?
I think that we are still in the process of awakening. Obviously, it's not a sort of bookended black and white deal. I think that the amount of energy that we need to pursue, that we need to invest in waking people up has never been greater. I think 2011 is going to be a make or break year. I mean, there is obviously momentum in the downward movement. We need to try and get people to wake up. On the plus side, people are getting enough empirical evidence and emotional uneasiness about where the system is. Everybody gets deep down that the current system is completely unsustainable, particularly with the explosion in astounding deficits over the past two years. Really since the war, but since the wars began. So people get mathematically, fundamentally, you don't have to be a PhD in mathematics to know that we are in a completely unsustainable situation. Everybody understands this. The unemployed, tragic though it is a wake-up call. You know, the system is no longer working for you. Middle-class incomes have stagnated or declined since the 1970s, since we went off the residuals of the gold standard, and which is entirely predictable. People get that the dollar has lost over 90% of its value since the Fed came in. Ron Paul, in talking about auditing the Fed, is waking people up to the fact that they swim in this ocean of fantasy money, which is bleeding away their resources. So the fact is there's so much evidence that we're not talking about an island over the horizon that we're afraid of hitting. It's within sight.
That's right. We're here, and that was the point I was trying to make. I mean, to quantify it, I'm saying I see 2010 as the time when the momentum began to shift, and I saw a greater amount of awakening in that 1 year than I'd seen in the previous 10. So I see that as a quantum acceleration, but also I see the gun coming out of the holster, as you said, where the Secretary of Defense openly says last week, I don't care what the American people want, or if 65% are against the Afghan war, it's going to continue. I mean, they're really being more brazen.
Yeah, and what have we always heard? If you have nothing to hide, you should not be afraid of scrutiny. Well, of course, with WikiLeaks, we can turn that exact same question back to the government and say, if you have nothing to hide, why are you afraid of some scrutiny? And the government can, of course, rifle through our bank accounts and our internet activities and our health records and anything else that you can imagine, or our tax records. But the moment we turn that light back on the government, they start calling for the assassination of a foreign national who has broken no U.S. laws. They're calling for a hit. This is something out of a mafia movie, and it's gone without significant comment in the mainstream media. A hit has been called out for on Julian Assange. That is kind of a thing that once you see it and once you point it out, you can't really go back to the cuddly government that's just interested in protecting you from dangerous people overseas. So I think that the violence, the hysteria, the aggression, the panic, and the disasters are accumulating to such a degree that when you say the system is fundamentally broken, people will agree. Now, when you say it's fundamentally unrepairable, people still have a problem, but at least they know that something has to change, and they also don't want it to change for the worst. We still have enough residual of classical liberalism, of libertarianism, of, you could say, even the ancient Greek devotion to personal liberty. We have enough of that residual left that we can still turn it around, but we really have to get behind this wheel and push and push and push.
Stefan Molyneux, I want to do 3-4 minutes with you on the other side, because I want you to really be able to boil down your political view, because when you call yourself a classical liberal, that's what I call myself. A modern conservative will think then that we're communist. I mean, they've really changed the terms. So I want to get down to terms and language. All right, Stefan Molyneux is our guest for just a few more minutes. And then we're going to get into the economy, and a smattering of other really important news, including these reports that are up on the Drudge Report. In fact, guys, I hit print on these. Will you grab them out of the printer for me? Thank you. 100 young people ransack store, mall closed, tumult, plan promoted on social media sites. There's also just all sorts of unrest and craziness increasing all over the world. Drudge is also linked to our story asking, are the 20 miles of dead fish and the thousands of dead birds raining out of the sky connected to government testing? Well, that'd be my number one guess. That's our number one suspects. I mean, if government's just engaged in secret radiological, chemical, biological testing over and over and over again, then why would we not look at them as the number one culprit? But going back to Stefan, and if he just joined us, he's an author. He's written on truth, tyranny of illusion, universally preferable behavior, a rational proof of secular ethics, real-time relationships, logic, love, everyday anarchy. It goes on from there. And the website's freedomdomainradio.com. Our websites, of course, are infowars.com and prisonplanet.tv. But again, if you read 1984, he was just covering and putting down in fiction what he'd already witnessed, working for government, working for communist, working for BBC, working for the imperial police in India. And George Orwell, a.k.a. Eric Blair, or vice versa, he wrote about destroying the language, reducing it down to where basically humans just make noise, 5 or 6 noises like a chimpanzee or like a cow. And now I see the studies out all over the world. The language is shrinking. People can't communicate. They take it as threatening if you can form complex ideas. But I don't think humanity is irrevocably broken. But when you say something like, a classical liberal, the average dumbed-down mainline conservative, who isn't conservative at all, they love the big defense budgets, they love it all, they think that means you're saying you're a communist, when a classical liberal is the opposite, aren't they?
There's no word left that hasn't been polluted by statism through which you can describe yourself as a freedom lover. So if you say, well, I'm a pacifist in that I oppose the initiation of force, then people think that you just want to lie down and have people go through your pockets and you're not in self-defense. So you can't use that. You can't use anarchist because then people associate that with idiots throwing bombs in malls, as you say, and there's not any particular coherence to that, even though people like Noam Chomsky call themselves anarchists. That's just not how the media portrays it. If you call yourself a liberal, people think that you're into big government programs. If people think if you're a conservative, then people think that you want government to restrict gay marriage or whatever. So we've really been crowded out at the discourse, which is why I simply say I'm a philosopher. There are certain conclusions that I accept as a result of the rational application of philosophy. So I try not to describe my conclusions because I don't want to be identified by the conclusions. Like if you're a biologist, you don't say, well, I'm a Darwinist, right? You just say, well, I accept certain theories of evolution as scientifically valid or whatever. So you don't want to, I think I really try to avoid identifying myself by my conclusions, right? That I accept that a state and society is the only rational and consistent application of the non-aggression principle. There's no group of human beings that you can fence off and give virtually limitless power to and not have it turn out badly. I mean, that's just not a good idea at all. It's not how people organize neighborhood blocks. Like if they want to protect the neighborhood, they don't just give a tank and a bomber and an army to some guy on the street corner and say, well, you take care of it all, because they know that that's going to end up badly. So I try to avoid conclusions. What I try to do is to say, well, I'm a philosopher, I accept reason, I accept evidence, and therefore this is where it leads. And hopefully people will start thinking along those lines. But yeah, you're right, there's no word left that you can describe. If you say, what are you? As, I don't know, carbon-based life form is the best I can come up with. So you're right, the language has been really polluted, and that is a great challenge for people.
I mean, I find myself every day, I say I'm exposing the left-right paradigm, because if you can shatter that and show how they divide us from each other so that we can be played off against each other instead of going after the actual social engineers, those that seek to limit knowledge, those that seek to dumb us down so we're more easily managed. But then to even communicate with the general public, I have to use left-right paradigm terms to then even introduce them to new ideas. And again, I don't even claim to have that sophisticated of a worldview. I just know that the direction we're going in is absolutely destructive by any historical, common sense, philosophical perspective. Stefan, it was great talking to you. I look forward to talking to you again in the near future. Good to have you here with us as one of the first guests in 2011.
Thank you so much, Alex, and a very happy new year to you and to all of your guests. And let's make this the year where we gain real traction and begin to really turn this thing around in a powerful way. And it's really important that people act decisively and concertedly and intelligently, because if it's not us, who is it going to be? And if it's not now, when is it going to be? The time's running out. So thank you so much for the conversation. I really do appreciate it.
Stefan, great having you with us. As John Connor says, if you're listening to my voice, you are the resistance. Look in the mirror, folks. That's who's going to fix it. And Hollywood puts these archetypes in our minds that it's got to be an Arnold Schwarzenegger or, you know, some type of Atlas character, some type of, you know, all-powerful Hercules archetype that is going to vanquish the slathering Hydra. That's not how it works. It starts small, little steps, little things, but almost harmonically, just continuing to push forward, continuing. I mean, look how powerful it is if a woman keeps henpecking you, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, that's basically what it's like is billions of us just pecking, you know, death by a trillion cuts on the globalist. And what cuts them is pulling them down, not worshiping them, pointing out how ridiculous they are, pointing out how corrupt they are, pointing out how destructive they are, pointing out how much hypocrisy they have. And first, it's just getting past your fear and not being in awe. You're a government, you know, person in a toilet attendant uniform. I will fall down and worship you. No, 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 no. You're some corporate chief. I'm not going to fall down and worship you. Okay. Now, I wanted to get into economic news, and I got some really serious news that I've known has been going on for about a month, along with other censorship, but that I wasn't 100% sure of. But now we've done our own test. I've talked to family that saved it. I've talked to others, and the emails, I mean, just Jaron saw 2 this morning without even looking. I mean, they're just pouring into this office. And it deals with conspiracy theory with Jesse Ventura, and there's no doubt there's a new level. There's actually 3 levels of censorship. We've only covered 1 here. I want to cover the 2nd and 3rd layer of the cake. We kept saying, I can't believe this made it on air. I can't believe that. Well, it didn't, okay? It didn't. They're phasing it out. They've banned shows, and now it's gotten worse. And that shows you the truth is effective with the globalist. I think the globalists kind of arrogantly said, let it on. It's too late for them anyways. They don't care. But then they saw the top ratings. Well, I'll tell the whole story in the next segment. Then I got some other important news I want to cover, and I got an interesting video we're going to be playing here as well. But before we go any further, I played back at the start of the last hour George Soros from a year ago on the Financial Times of London website, a video interview, saying we got to get rid of the U.S. dollar slowly, we got to bring in global government, we got to bring in a global government currency. He talked about how that would be done, how China needs to be the owner of the U.S., and now they are the biggest owner of our debt. Next, the private Federal Reserve. I mean, you can see the method to their madness. And then it continues. China backs Spain to emerge from crisis. That's Sydney Morning Herald. China's now buying up Europe. Foreign banks are buying up Greece. It's all done through fraud. U.S. yield spread falls below the rest of the world. Now foreigners don't want U.S. corporations and U.S. government treasury notes. That's out of Bloomberg. Very serious developments. And sure enough, silver well above $30 an ounce. Stand up for your right. Paul Watson and I just rushed out an article today that only has 15 or so examples of declassified U.S. government chemical biological testing on the American people. But I'm going to get Watson to add Project Shad that went into the 1990s, examples of U.S. and British troops being nerve gassed. There's a lot of other hardcore examples, especially now because the Drudge Report is linked to it in red. This is a great chance to educate people. We've also got ENDGAME, Blueprint for Global Enslavement, posted the full film for free at the bottom of it. So all these people that aren't aware of this can get informed. We do need to add a description, though, of ENDGAME as a history of government, lethal testing so that people know what they're about to see. So I'm trying to get a hold of Watson right now, so I'm intercomming him on the radio live so we can get some of that stuff added to it. In fact, send your mainstream news articles about declassified chemical and biological testing on people to showtips@infowars.com. I know there's thousands of them, and we'll just add a few dozen at the bottom of the article, because this story is getting a lot of attention. Going back to Ted Anderson, then I'll get into the conspiracy theory being censored and a lot of other news. Ted, talking to you here in the new year, I mean, look, I had Rolling Stone magazine here, and since they talked to George Norrie about me, and he talked about it, I'll go ahead and talk about it now. But I wasn't going to talk about it until it actually got published, but whatever. They were here, and they were asking me, you know, why do you promote gold? And I said, well, look, I've been promoting gold since it was $300 an ounce or less. I've been promoting silver since it was $5 an ounce, and look, it's gone up. I believe in it. I know it's a real commodity. I know that they're devaluing the currency. So it's only a matter of time till until these commodities go up. And so I still believe $31 an ounce for silver's low, $1,400 an ounce for gold is low. Now, we'll see who's right. But for 10 years, in fact, let's put on screen for folks. Matt found a really good one last week, 10-year gold chart. It's parabolic, and it's reaching that point where it goes straight up now. I mean, again, this is not brain surgery. This is not rocket science. This is common sense. And so that's why I feel really good promoting gold and silver. It seems like every few months, a maid who works for Jeb Bush or Marvin or George W. or George Herbert Walker gets run over in their parking lot, or their dead body gets found out on the beach in front of the house, or another lady down in Houston says George W. raped her, and then she blows her head off a few days later. Well, Fox News reports cops have found a former Bush aide. He was murdered, found in a landfill. Well, they just had Fahmy Malek, the Arkansas medical examiner. They found dead cops, you name it, in landfills in Arkansas with their arms and legs chopped off. And Fahmy Malek would say they did it to themselves. That only works in Monty Python, the Holy Grail, I think. It's just a scratch. A man who fought to get the Vietnam Veterans Memorial built and served in 2 Bush administrations was murdered, Delaware police say. John P. Wheeler III, 66, was found dead in Delaware landfill, and his death has been ruled a homicide by Newark, Delaware police. They're asking the public for leads in the case. Was he just robbed by somebody, or did something else happen? Or did somebody want to bury some facts with charities? Wheeler's body was found in Wilmington on Friday after a disposal truck containing his body made pickups in Newark. Wheeler, who lived in Newcastle, was chairman of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund during the Ronald Reagan era. He also held many high-profile government positions after graduating from West Point in 1966. He was an experienced business turnaround consultant. Police believe Wheeler's body had been placed inside one of the bins in Newark before a disposal truck arrived. So there you have it. Here's a new report by Jason Douglas. Great job, Jason Douglas. I did see this up on the Drudge Report today from Mainstream News, but he's broke it down, the fact that it's connected to global warming umbrella. That's their cover. Germany hides spy satellite under global warming umbrella, undertaking a costly project with an immense scope. Like next-generation spy satellites cannot be done in private. The vast amounts of money involved in these state-of-the-art endeavors make secrecy next to impossible. This is why the current modus operandi is to cloak large-scale, conventional, controversial projects as private commercial ventures with a specific scientific focus, like media buzz term, global warming. WikiLeaks has exposed yet another of these clandestine projects by releasing diplomatic cables showing the involvement of at least one German agency, the BND, an intelligence service, launching spy satellites under the name of global warming satellites. Well, yeah, that's how they introduced in Australia and the U.S. that local police would be using spy satellites now that we paid for to fight the Ruskies. They go, oh, it's for the Earth. It's to stop fires, wildfires. And then next we learn they're watching your wife suntan in the backyard. Interesting article by Jason Douglas. Get that out to folks from Infowars.com. Germany hides spy satellite under global warming umbrella. Okay, I said I would get to this. And, you know, when you actually get censored yourself, It's hard to believe. I'll never forget in 1999, Shamrock Communications, they own like 50-something radio stations, 30-something newspapers, medium-sized company. I was getting top ratings for 98.9 FM here in Austin, and making them a lot of money, and I was getting paid almost nothing because I didn't have an agent, didn't know radio. I just wanted to reach people. And Jay Leno talked about me for some reason, made a joke. And a bunch of BBC came in to interview me. We were getting a lot of attention. And so the general manager of all the outfit flew down, and he came into the office, and they had a consultant there, and they said, "You're going to cover sex and relationships now." And I said, "But it's 98.9 FM, First Amendment at its best." And they go, "Not anymore. Next week, it's just going to be called talk radio." Because they had new management then at the local station. And I said, well, what am I not allowed to talk about? And they said, no more Bill Clinton, no more Waco, no more Delta Force, no more New World Order. And by the way, don't talk about Governor George W. Bush. And I went, wow. And I found out right before Mark Keister left to go run the YMCA. He was the good guy that hired me, along with a former radio guy by the name of Sharkman was his radio handle, who'd actually been syndicated all over the country and was actually a radio person, and called me. They saw me on Access, said, "You got talent, you want a show?" Boom, of course, it was successful. But they told me no more of this stuff. And about a week later, they said, "You're still talking about this stuff." And I said, well, I told you in the meeting I can't shut up about these issues. I do this for passionate reasons. And the guy slapped me. I mean, pretty hard, like, "Oh, yeah," and it kind of hurt, and I almost punched him. Big fat guy. Looked like Ron Jeremy. I almost punched him right there. I mean, but I controlled myself because I wanted to reach the people and defeat the New World Order. I mean, I'll go through a mile of you-know-what to fight the globalist. I'll put up with any amount of humiliation. He slapped me. He's like, "Hey, you're not going to be talking like that no more." I mean, almost like that. And I was like, he was an East Coast guy, and I said, okay. Because I knew to at least be passive-aggressive enough to just go, okay, and then keep doing what I was going to do. You know, kind of like the Japanese do. Just, you know, they'll let your produce come in from a foreign country. They just let it rot on the dock. So I let it rot on the dock, and like 10 weeks later, they fired me and got off on it and tried to get me to blow up. And, of course, here I am today. What failures that Ron Jeremy lookalike is. So all of that happened, and I still couldn't believe it. By the way, the day they fired me, the BBC was there again to interview me, and they yelled at me and laughed at me and said, "Get your stuff and get out of here," and did it all in front of the media. And I knew I was telling the truth and fighting the globalists, and I wasn't worried about it. I'd already started doing a show over satellite that was being picked up by stations, so I'd already, started a new operation. It's the information that can't be stopped. It's the signal. And then Ventura's show was going to air last year, and Ventura and I privately did not believe it was going to air. The global warming special proving it was a fraud before Climategate had even broken. The world population reduction plans of Maurice Strong. But then when it did air, Ventura and I decided it got under the radar. And then they started having their stuff robbed and their stuff broken into and threats and things they don't want me to talk about because it's private. And all of this craziness went on. And then their police state episode aired once, normally airs more than 50 times in the next year. Should have already aired more than 10 times since November. They banned it, disappeared it. Then they are not airing the JFK as much. They're not airing the Wall Street very much. And people who believe in DVRs, people who think they're great. I told you many years ago, they watch what you watch. They track what you watch. Many of them have microphones and cameras built in. All the new video games coming out have it. And they track everything you're doing. Now that's admitted. First got admitted 4 years ago, Janet Jackson malfunction. And they reported, TiVo, 2.2 million rewinds, replays within 1 minute of it happening. And the Chicago Tribune asked, how do you know that? So that's what's going on here. That's what's happening. And I got to get to this next video, but when we come back in the final segment, I'll tell you the latest censorship dealing with this. But I barely got time to get to this now. This is from the 1970s. It's a Orson Welles piece from Plato's The Cave. And if you go to Infowars.com, you can see it. It's called The Cave, How Man is Controlled. And it describes, and I'd read Plato back in college, but I'd forgotten about it. It describes everything I've gone through. Once you've been out of the cave, you don't care about laurels or awards, or you just care about the truth and the wonderment of life, and you passionately want to unlock people who've been in the mind control system. And this was written 2,300 plus years ago by Plato. And imagine how you can take the cave wall with the puppets for television. All these years later, how perfectly the cave describes the mechanism that has captured, deceived, and diverted us from what's important and real about humanity. Real life has been arrested in our modern day. Instead, television and other forms of bread and circus present to us imitations of life that we learn to take on as our role models and heroes. Think about sports. Think about fashion. These are all shadows on the cave wall. The world is so much bigger. And if I can just get people to think outside the box, I've done my job. We're going to come back in the final segment. I'll get into the censorship going on. 21st century censorship. You can absolutely be assured of that. Phase 1, Phase 2, and now Phase 3 of the memory holding of the TV show Conspiracy Theory. Full details in the final segment. Straight ahead, I'm Alex Jones. Okay, so back in early November, the police state episode of Ventura Show aired that I consulted heavily on. It was filled with our footage. Of course, I appeared in it. We went to the local FEMA camps. We went and confronted congressmen. Ventura did. The congressman melted down, denied the legislation, even though that they'd introduced it, the Emergency Centers Act. And then Homeland Security and several congressmen started threatening and putting pressure behind the scenes on Time Warner that owns and controls True TV. True TV, and the head of it, what Mark Juris is his name, had never been censored. They had a free hand. They'd sworn to Ventura, don't worry last year, it's going to air. It got top ratings for True TV. That's high ratings, 1.7, 1.8 million. The first time it airs. They air it over and over and over again. Now, this season came out. They stuck it on Fridays, which a lot of internal people thought was an attempt to make it fail. It still got top ratings on a Friday night. Then we noticed that they didn't re-air the police state episode. Sure enough, Ventura called. You heard him here a few weeks ago, confirmed. Deep Six at the top. Now we've noticed that they have not been airing or barely re-airing. Like they'll air one of the other not as hard-hitting ones 2 or 3 times compared to airing the JFK once. JFK is getting Deep Sixed. Others are getting Deep Sixed. And TiVo and other DVRs in their manuals, the two-way TiVos, you know, it's coming in off cable, they admittedly sell on the side what you watch and what you do, your psychological profile for advertising that, you know, targets you through direct mail, internet, and other ways, just like Google does. And they track what you're watching, what you're recording. And they never, I've looked this up, never go in and erase things off DVRs remotely, though they have that power. We have had emails in the last month pouring in. So we've done tests here at the office. I've had other people do tests. It's true. They are erasing not, and Federal Jack's done tests, We Are Change have done tests. They'll show video of the DVR, and then they'll only erase certain ones. What are they erasing? If you had the police state episode, they went into your computer, into your DVR, and erased it. You could have last season's, this season's. You could have 15 other episodes. That episode they erase. That one episode of 16. Now they're remotely, and we're getting emails from everybody confirming this, they're erasing the JFK, Wall Street, water. I mean, do you think they want people knowing they're putting poison in the water and all the admissions? And these emails are just pouring in. And yes, we've confirmed it. Yes, Federal Jack's confirmed it. We Are Changes confirmed it. We've confirmed it. It's going on. In fact, there's videos online on YouTube that show where it's been erased inside the DVRs. And a lot of them are getting erased off YouTube now. They do not want you seeing this, especially that police state episode. It only aired once. Quote, I wanted to bring to your attention all the shows that we recorded on our direct TV DVR of Jesse Ventura's show. Season 1 and 2 were removed without mine and my husband's permission. We do not have any settings on our DVR which would allow or permit the shows to be erased and deleted from our DirecTV receiver recorder. We discovered this when we went to see what show was recorded this past Friday. And other emails tell the same story, and it's not all their shows, it's just these. Others say it's just the JFK episode, or it's just the water episode, or the Wall Street. My TiVo erased my JFK episode. I recorded the encore presentation and transferred it to my PC via TiVo VO desktop 2.7. If you have a network TiVo, then only sure way to keep your program is a TiVo desktop. It's a shame, but I have had 2 conspiracy theory episodes disappear now. Thank you for your time. Absolutely. This is what's going on, folks. Don't take this information for granted.